The title of today's shir to all of our precious listeners and viewers is the indispensable link between Pesach and Shvuyos. We're holding by the end of Chag Pesach, and we've undertaken the mitzvah of Sfirat Ha'omel, which according to many Rishonim, the Bir Halacha, the Mishnah Berurah points out, is a mitzvah min haTorah. We are biblically mandated every day to count the Homer, and of course the Sfirat Ha'omel, this specific mitzvah of counting the days between the second day of Passover and Shavuos, which is of course the holiday celebrating the giving of the Torah. So these days link Pesach with Shavuos to the extent that we all know that, in contradistinction to Pesach and Sukkot, the Torah did not specify a day. Insofar as the month is concerned, there's no datum when the holiday of Shavuos takes place. It's 50 days after the second day of Pesach. And of course, the reason for that is because the very purpose of Yetzias Mitzrayim, as the Chinuch points out, and the great Rishonim, is Kabbalas HaTorah. And if it would not be for the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's divine plan was to give Klal Yisrael the Torah, choose them to be the Am HaNivchar, the chosen people, through Torah and mitzvahs, so therefore there never would have been an exodus from Mitzrayim. We could read that in Shin Vov, that's mitzvah 306. The Chinuch points out, Mishar Shem mitzvah tzad pshat. In other words, this is not mysticism, this is simple understanding, clear Torah thinking, insofar as the mitzvah of Sfirat Ha'omel, the counting of the days of the Homer, is concerned. Vishkol ikaron shel Yisrael eino elo haTorah. By the plain meaning of the understanding of this mitzvah, so what lies at the very root is that the entire main element of the life of the Jewish people is nothing other than the Torah. And on account of the Torah, heaven and earth and the Jewish people were created. That is written, if it would not be for my bris of Torah, so day and night would not be able to exist. In other words, due to the fact that we have Torah and we have mitzvahs, so this is what provides the heaven and the earth to continue to function. And now he says his famous phrase, V'hi ha'ikar v'hasiba shenigalu v'yotzu miMitzrayim k'dei sheyikablu ha'Torah v'sinai v'yikaimu. And this is the very principle. This is the salient feature and the reason why the Jewish people were rescued and went forth out of Egypt, so they should accept the Torah at Har Sinai and fulfill it. So this is a link between Pesach and Shavuos. However, the title of today's shir is the indispensable link between Pesach and Shavuos, and we're going to try to focus our attention on a perhaps esoteric principle of Torah thinking. However, it would appear that in this specific case, it's quite exoteric as well. And the point of departure, of course, will be the Shulchan Aruch that codifies the laws of our daily existence. And the Shulchan Aruch in Tov Peites brings down that the times of Sfira, Noagu, Klal Yisrael, Minig Avelus, the entire Jewish people have adopted and accepted certain halachas of expressing grief, sorrow, and mourning. This is very important to point out, is not an ordinance that was set forth by the Chachmei Talmud. It's not a takana, it's not an ordinance that was established in the times of the Gemara. In the times of Chazal, there was no minig avelus between Pesach and Shvuyas. No one conducted themselves with the prohibition of getting married or of shaving, haircuts during this period of time. And of course, these are basically rooted in the laws of mourning for a precious individual that was lost, mother, father. And of course, that has to continue for 12 months, Yud Beis, Chodesh, 12 months of Avelus, and a person cannot get married or attend a wedding for those 12 months. And of course, he cannot shave or get a haircut unless he's rebuked by other people. These are halachas of Avelus. They did not exist in the times of Chazal. Chachmei Talmud did not establish any Dine Avelus in this specific time period. The origin was in the Tkufas HaGoinim. Tkufas HaGoinim, that was the period of Talmudic jurisprudence that preceded the Chasimas Hashas, the conclusion of writing down the oral tradition, what we call the Talmud and the Gemara. There's no question about it that the Goinim did have a connection with what we call Rabbanon Savuroi, the last generation of Amoyroyim, but nevertheless, the Takana originates from the Goinim and almost supernatural as
It's going to the Mac, then.
simultaneously. So what could perhaps be the ramification of the Shulchan Aruch saying that Kiddushin is acceptable? So the Mishnah Berurah says, Bizmanenu, in our times, we're allowed to make a shidduch between a boy and a girl, and we can make a sudas erison, a celebration, a meal that celebrates the shidduch during this period of time. So that is the practical ramification of the Shulchan Aruch in our time. So far as honoring the kavod, the shidduchim of the match that was made between the boy and the girl, lasois seuda, avol lasois rikudim mechoilos noagu iser. But let's say during the celebration and in the course of the meal, so the boys want to get together, sing and dance, so that is forbidden. That was not allowed. That is not allowed bismanenu. So the Pri Megadim, one of the great commentators of the Shulchan Aruch hundreds of years ago, points out that it would be possible Chol HaMoed Pesach also to celebrate the Shidduchim and make a festive meal in honor of the match that was now consummated. But we have to be careful and not have dancing and singing on Chol HaMoed Pesach in honor of the Shidduchim. This is what the Pri Megadim says, and till recent times we didn't see anybody that disagreed with that. Minchas Yitzchak, one of the great poskim in our generation, said that that's unacceptable because during Pesach we have a mitzvah min haTorah. There's a biblical mitzvah insofar as simcha is concerned, being happy, rejoicing, and that's a mitzvah min haTorah, biblically mandated. So how can the Pri Megadim say that during Chol HaMoed Pesach it is also forbidden during the festive meal to celebrate the shidduch through singing and dancing? Cannot accept it. It's a mitzvah min haTorah. When we take out a moment to think, we also know that the Pri Megadim, the great poskim, until Melech Mashiach will appear in Klal Yisrael, we don't have to eulogize or explain who the Pri Megadim is. He's the greatest of the last poskim. Hundreds of years ago in the Shulchan Aruch, he was also aware of this. So what's the point that he mentioned it? That was the minig in the Jewish nation. The communities which he researched very thoroughly accepted upon themselves, even during Chol HaMoed Pesach, when you make a shidduch, not to sing and not to dance and bring an extra level of happiness and cheerfulness to the chassan and the kala. So we see not only to what extent it's spread in Klal Yisrael, but we also see how severe it was accepted. L'chumra, it was accepted even during Chol HaMoed Pesach, not to undertake certain forms of simcha, which min haTorah would appear to be a big mitzvah. And of course, the question naturally arises, why did the Gaonim, in contradistinction to the Gemara, Mesaka make this ordinance? So the Shulchan Aruch answers, Sheboisei Perik Mesu Talmidei de Rebbe Kiva, and the Gemara states emphatically there were 12,000 pairs of Talmidim that the great Rebbe Kiva had. V'kulam Mesu bePerik Echad, and they all died in one period of time, because Shalei Noagu Kovid Zelozeh, because somehow or other they didn't show the proper respect one for another. We'll get back to that phrase in a moment. And the Tana says, Kula Mesa mi Pesach ad Atzeres. This is the Gemara Samech Beis in Yevomis. Now, Samach Beis in Yevomis states this. They all died in this specific period of time. Reb Reuven Grozovsky, Chasonat Debeit Nesir Reb Baruch Ber, was astonished when he learned this Gemara. And it wasn't the first time that he was simply astonished when he saw this Gemara, but in the course of his entire lifetime, he could not understand this Gemara. It's 2,000 years that Klal Yisrael have ordained minig avelos. I've accepted it. The Takonas HaGoinim, it's an ordinance of the Goinim, accepted close to 2,000 years because of a tragedy of 24,000 Talmidim of Rebbe Kiva perishing in this specific time period. And we can't understand it because under no circumstances do we have a halachic grant of permission to mourn, to express sorrow and grief for a tragedy more than one day. Tisha B'Av was a national catastrophe. 2 times the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. All the other fast days, of course, revolve around that. Shivasa B'Tammuz, Asara B'Teves. But these are single days that they commemorate a national tragedy. Beis HaMikdash was destroyed in, we could say, almost an antiquity. Nevertheless, we have a principle that we try to relive it, we try to experience it, because this is very, very fundamental to Jewish existence. So we try to relive the tragedy, and indeed we mourn for the loss of the Beis HaMikdash, for the terrible catastrophe of Churban Beis HaMikdash, and also the Siluk HaShechina. There's no question about it. This is something which we need, like the Poskim say, a full identification with these past events. Even though the Beis HaMikdash has not been here for thousands of years, destroyed for that period of time, nevertheless, we have to try to re-experience the past because this is so fundamental to our existence. Of course, those that lived through it were shattered, destroyed, and then as time went on, it slowly faded away, and we are incumbent on a national level to relive it, re-experience it, because of its importance to the existence of Klal Yisrael. However, as big as this tragedy was, Reb Reuven does not understand how the Goinim made a takana of 7 weeks of mourning and expressing sorrow for this tragedy. Basically speaking, the question of Reb Reuven, it's against the Shulchan Aruch. Even if you have 24,000 individuals that were great scholars, great people, Tanoim, but the halacha is that we do not more than 12 months mourn for the loss of an individual. You remember the yahrzeit, that's true, but mourning for 7 weeks is simply unacceptable. We do not understand it. Number 2, Reb Reuven points out, how is it that they were Tanoim, great Torah scholars, and their Torah did not protect them against such an evil decree insofar as that all of them perished in a short period of time. We don't understand it. And how is it that Klal Yisrael was not protected by the Torah of these 24,000 Tanoim? Because the Gemara dramatically states, the Hoya Ha'olam Shomem, the world was totally desolate. Rashi points out that the entire Torah was forgotten until Rebbe Kiva miraculously, in his old age, was able to motivate himself and inspire himself to start once again. A person should undertake to achieve great things in his youth when he has the koiches hanefesh, he has his spiritual strength, his spiritual endowments. Nevertheless, in his old age, such a catastrophe like losing 24,000 Talmidim, there was never an institution as great as the yeshiva of Rebbe Kiva, 24,000 Tanoim. To lose all of them in one period of time is simply overwhelming, simply overpowering. We cannot begin to fathom the supernatural powers of Rebbe Kiva, that in his old age, he's the one that formulated this statement. Even in the times when the sun is setting in your personal life, you have to energize yourself, you have to charge yourself and continue with an undertaking of spreading Torah in Klal Yisrael. Only a great personage like Rebbe Kiva could accomplish this great achievement until he came to the 5 Talmidim that he found in the south of Eretz Yisrael. The world was totally desolate. That's what the Gemara says. So Reb Ruvain comes to the conclusion that the greatest of all catastrophes that struck Klal Yisrael was not the Churban Beis HaMikdash, not Churban Bayis Rishon, not Churban Bayis Sheni. What was it? The death of 24,000 Tanoim. So Reb Ruvain writes, this is the Tzara Hayoso Gedola BeYisrael, the greatest Tzara in Klal Yisrael. We are astonished to hear such words because we understand in our consciousness that Churban Beis HaMikdash was much greater. But Reb Ruvain asked a tremendous question, 2 tremendous questions. What's the answer to these questions? So Moron, Rosh HaYeshiva, Reb Aaron Kotler, Zecher Tzadik V'Kodesh Levracha basically answered these 2 questions. We shall just try to elaborate on what he said, although he didn't speak this exact idea out. He did not express this idea, but we first, as a way of introduction, we should like to express what we humbly think is the answer to this question, and then we'll see that what Rabbi Aaron Kotler said fits in contextually. What's the answer? The answer is that it is not a chiyuv of avelus b'teiras atzmai. In other words, it's not a separate, independent obligation upon us to express grief for the loss of 24,000 Talmidim almost 2,000 years ago. What is Avelus? The mourning of a loss. Of course, if somebody is very precious to you, somebody is very dear to you, he's part of your life, so a person is obligated. He would do it perhaps without an obligation, very naturally, to express his sorrow and grief for the loss of that individual. This is something which took place many, many years ago, and they're not a member of our immediate family. And if so, it would be very difficult on people that are basically anonymous, totally anonymous, that we should be, after so many thousands of years, grief-stricken for their loss. So what's the point of the Avelus? Answer is that we must undertake self-introspection. And we have to basically study, delve into what was the reason that this happened. Al mo osa Hashem kacha. And through that, we should come to a conclusion that we are obligated in this specific time period, especially to improve our bein adam lechaveira, our interpersonal relationships and to make sure there's no aspect of any disrespect that one displays to another. It's a zman, it's a time of tikkun amidas, of ameliorating, improving our behavior insofar as our fellow man is concerned. That was the purpose. Not grieving, showing sorrow for the essential loss of these 24,000 Talmidim, because Reb Ruvain said we don't understand such a thing. But 7 weeks, it must be the greatest tragedy of all. It is a great tragedy. Not the greatest tragedy of all, a great tragedy it is. But the purpose is not to mourn for their loss. We don't know who they are. The purpose is that we should try to understand why there was a decree against them, and we should try to ameliorate, improve our personal conduct. And we'll explain why in this specific period of time. Why? That's the question. Why in this specific period of time? The Gemara goes out of its way and says, the Kula Mesu Bein Pesach Leatzeres. So before we answer this question, we should just like to mention, as we mentioned before, a story involving Reb Aaron Kotler, which will place what we mentioned now in proper perspective. When Reb Aaron Kotler came to America, his whole yeshiva was lost. Few Talmidim survived. 98% of the Talmidim were murdered by the Nazim, Yamach Shemom v'Zichrom. The total disaster, totally wiped off the face of the earth, Yeshivas Kletsk. When the Askonim forced Reb Aaron Kotler, who was not interested in reestablishing the yeshiva, he worked day and night for Vadat Zola to save the Jews in the concentration camp to the best of his ability, together with Reuven Grozovsky, Reb Lezer Silver, the Satmarov, in the midst of World War II. However, the Askonim understood that it would be worthwhile for the American Jewry to have a yeshiva. So Aaron Kotler reluctantly agreed. However, he did not want to accept the conditions that they were about to force on Reb Aaron Kotler. Reb Aaron Kotler said he does not make compromises. He wants to open up a yeshiva just like he had in Klesk, without any compromises to the atmosphere that was prevalent in America in those days. So there was a very volatile discussion. And at the end, Reb Aaron Kotler asked the following question. This is pertinent to our discussion. Reb Aaron Kotler asked, what would be if you 8 people, these were the Askonim that, so to speak, tried to convince and ultimately did convince Reb Aaron Kotler to open up a yeshiva in Lakewood, New Jersey. He asked them the following question. What would you have decided had you been able to decide the issue whether HaKadosh Baruch Hu should destroy the entire world of Torah that consists of these 24,000 Talmidim v'Rebbe Akiva, or HaKadosh Baruch Hu should have the Torah continue, even though insofar as giving over the Torah to the next generation, it will be a Torah that's defective. We know, said the Baron Kotler, Memches Dvar Torah Niknes Bohem. Torah is only acquired with 48 attributes. Most of those attributes are Ben Adam Lechaveiro, or interpersonal relationships. Oyeves Abriyas. How does a person acquire Torah knowledge? Through loving his fellow man. It's a catharsis. It purifies his soul. It's easier, says the guy, for him now to absorb Torah. If he's crass, he has a grossness about him, he cannot in any way absorb the delicacy of Torah. Is another attribute. The person has to feel the sorrow of someone else. He has to be able to burden, give a shoulder, and help out a person who is in trouble. Shoulder the burden together with him. So we see that many of these attributes have to do to personal or interpersonal conduct of a high level of morality and ethicism and kindness. It negates all types of pettiness, selfishness. It requires a care, concern, and involvement with somebody else, and above all, to show him the due reverence that he deserves. So now the question is, no question about it, the next generation will not have a Torah of 48 attributes, because those that are now transmitting the Torah have a defect in their behavior. It's to a degree a little irreverential, not that we understand it, but that's what the Gemara tells us, for us to understand as far as our own personal lives are concerned. But the alternative, said the Baron Kotler, is V'hoya Olam Shameim. It was totally desolate. The world was desolate from Torah. Torah was forgotten. So the great Rosh Yeshiva said, what would you do? But before that, if you had a choice to decide the issue, before that, I would just like to ask you one or two more questions. What would you say would be the next generation? If all these 24,000 Talmidim perish, so they all answered, all 8 simultaneously in unison answered, the next generation is going to be a generation of Amaratzim, people that have no idea what Torah is, because there's nobody to transmit the Torah. There's nobody to receive the Torah. So how could they transmit it? There's a vacuum. And what would be the generation afterwards? So again, they all answered in unison. The Jewish people will cease to exist. It will be a total assimilation, because the only thing which stops assimilation is Torah and mitzvahs. So then the great Rabbaran Kotler asked these 8 askonim. I heard this from somebody who was present, one of the 8, many years ago. This is the accurate version. What would you have done? What would be your choice? You have 2 alternatives. Transmit from one generation to another generation a defective Torah, or better, a defective Torah, at least there'll be Torah and there'll be an Am Yisrael. So they all answered once again in unison, we would have decided the issue that better there should be a transmission of a defective Torah. It wouldn't be 48 attributes. It would be 47. It'll be 46. It won't be that a person should feel the burden of somebody else's sorrow and somebody else's trouble on his shoulders. They won't have that experiential element in their personality. Nope. They won't. But better 46 or 47 than no Torah at all. So Baron Kotler smiled. And he said, no, what did the Hashgacha decide? So they were all astounded. We don't understand that. Our understanding, we can't understand why such a tragedy should take place, with the consequences being assimilation. So the great Rabbaran Kotler answered the following words. On Memches Dvarim, without a complete 48 attributes through which a person can acquire the Torah, if there'll be 47, 46, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't need a Torah, and he doesn't need a Jewish nation. only Reb Aaron Kotler could say that. The exact words in Yiddish were a darfnet katero and a darfnet am Yisrael. Amazing, overwhelming, mind-boggling to see the importance of Midas Tavis. And at this juncture, we should say that we do not understand this Gemara. We Bechlal have no understanding of this Gemara, because from our point of view and our accepted way of assessing such situations, so we come out that these 24,000 Tanoim all emanated from Beis Kodesh HaKadoshim. They were Tanoim. They were capable of performing Tchias HaMesim. We understand that if somebody sat at the table of Rebbe Kiva for 1 week, so he would merit Torah, Yirah Shamayim, the fear of heaven, and the perfection of ethicism and morality in the essence of his character and personality, that would last him an entire lifetime. So we don't understand what took place here. Absolutely no understanding, and we're not interested. What we do understand is that we are obligated on our level, according to our understanding of morality and ethicism in our very character and personality, to improve. And the question naturally arises, why in this specific time period did this catastrophe take place? The answer, according to clear Torah thinking that was taught to us by Rabbi Seinu HaKadoshim from the times of the Rishonim till now, 1,000 years, is that we believe with a complete faith, be'emunah shleima, that every day that goes by from Pesach till Atzeres, we become closer to Ma'amad Har Sinai. This is an experience of the present. This is a fact. It's a living reality. That we come closer to Har Sinai because the Yontiv of Matan Torah is Nischadesh, appears anew every year. And the Riyah Kodesh already says those are the simple words in the Tefillah that we say, Vatiten Lanu Hashem Elokeinu Be'ava Moadim L'Simcha, appointed days, Chagim Uzmanim L'Sasaim. What is Chagim Uzmanim? Zmanim we understand. Certain times of the year that we have celebrations, Sukkot, Pesach, Shvuyas. What is Chagim? So Chagim, said the Riyah Kodesh, comes from Lashon Mechoygeg. In Hebrew, that is the hand on the watch. Just like the hand of the watch, when it makes a complete cycle, comes back to the original point of departure. Likewise, the Moyadim come back to their original point of departure. They're Chagim. We celebrate Shvuyas not because once upon a time, historically, there was a Matan Torah. No, today there's a Matan Torah. It's happening this year. And this is something which we have to feel. On another occasion, we'll speak about Yetzias Mitzrayim, which is identical to this fundamental way of thinking. But now we have to understand that we are now in a time of preparation for Matan Torah. It's a living reality. It's going to take place this year in the spiritual realm. And we can really achieve great, lofty, dizzying heights on Shvuyas with the proper preparation. Is this a mystical idea? Or is this basically a halacha? Can the halacha, so to speak, serve as evidence and verify this? Of course. The Gemara Kufchov Tes and Shabbos says, "Osalak is dam erev yontiv datzeres de sakanto." Erev Shvuyos, it's also to let blood. In other words, it's not good to take a blood test. Mishnah Berurah said unless it's an emergency. So we don't allow bloodletting, a blood test, Erev Shvuyos. Why? Because it's a danger. What's the danger? Because Erev Shvuyos, we have a mazik, a bird that brings danger and wants to injure people, that appears in the world, and somebody who has had his blood taken from him is in a worse situation, a greater sakana than someone else. So it's, in other words, we're trying to avoid a danger from a mazik that's called tavuach attacking that person. Erev Pesach and Erev Sukkot, it's also forbidden. So the Gemara said that's only a gezerah, that's a prohibition against Erev Shvuyos. It's just some sort of precautionary measure. But when is it a sakana? Erev Shvuyos, it's a sakana. So the Goyin asked the simple question. The day Bnei Yisrael prepared themselves for Kabbalah Satayra, on that day, the mazik that had a name Tavuach appeared on the scene. And whoever he meets, he will cause injury to him. And the greatest danger, says the Goyin, is posed for someone who is making his dam, who has now let out blood. So for him, it's a great danger that this mazik poses. Yet, says the Goyin, that this scenario was only extant by the original Matan Torah. The Gemara says, black on white, Bisman Matan Torah, on the day, the historical event of the Torah, 4,000 years ago. But what about today? Today there's no Matan Torah. So why does this halacha apply? So we see, says the Goyin, it's a mistake. The halacha applies today because once again, says the Goyin, we will be standing by Har Sinai. And interestingly, the greatest of all the Kabbalists, Shimon Bar Yochai, in the Zohar, and it's brought down in the Machzor of Tikkun, Leil Shavuos, part of the Machzor is devoted to the Tikkun of Leil Shavuos, that we say over the Zohar. So the evening before the day of Shavuos, so we have over here an unbelievable story. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai gathered his Talmidim together, and he informed them that tomorrow we're going to a chasana, we're going to a wedding. So therefore, the minhag is to prepare a matana for the kala. Who is the kala? The Torah. So everybody should prepare a chiddush Torah as a present to the kala, because tomorrow there's a great wedding that's going to take place between the Jewish people. They are like the chosen, they're like the groom, and the bride is the Torah. So it's interesting, almost fascinating, that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, the greatest of all the Kabbalists, spoke in such practical, down-to-earth terms about Shvuyos. He lived a few thousand years also after Matan Torah. And the Bir Halacha, as we mentioned a moment ago, holds that the Chinuch agrees with the Rambam that Sfirat Ha'omer in our time is biblically mandated. It's a mitzvah min HaTorah. And according to most Rishonim, there's 49 separate mitzvahs min HaTorah. And it's really fascinating, almost remarkable, how the Chinuch explains the mitzvah of Matan Torah. He makes no mention of the word zecher, it's a remembrance. Number two, he does not mention Karban Oimel, the sacrifice of the Oimel, which took place on the 16th of Nisan, or the Shtei Alechem, that's the specific sacrifice on Shvuyas. What does the Chinuch say? Mishoshei mitzvah is that we were commanded to count Mimocharis Yontav Shel Pesach Hayom Yasinas HaTorah 49 days. Why? Leharois b'nafshenu ha'chefetz hagodol el hayom hanichsov v'hanichbod l'libeinu ke'eved yishav tzel v'yibne tomet mos hayovoy ho'es hanichsov elov she'etze lecheros. The counting between Passover and Shavuos is to show with our very souls our great yearning, our longing for that distinguished day for which our hearts pine and long as a servant eagerly longs for the shadow, for protection, that is the protection of the Torah, and constantly counts and reckons when his longed for time will come, when he will go out to freedom. Counting shows about a person that all of his hope, all of his aspirations is to come to that time that his whole life revolves around that. So this is the way the Chinuch explains the mitzvah. The Mishnah Berurah, the Chafetz Chaim, learned the Chinuch that it's a mitzvah in HaTorah. A pella, a wonder. The Chinuch is explaining the mitzvah, which is brought down in Parshas Emor after Matan Torah. What does the counting indicate? Eved Yishav Tzel, a servant is longing for the great shadow of protection of HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the Torah. But we already have the Torah. We're holding 4,000 years after Matan Torah. A mitzvah in HaTorah today with an explanation that we're longing and pining for the Torah. There's no word zecher. It's a remembrance to once upon a time. Masbir explains a mitzvah after Matan Torah. So we have to come to the conclusion that Matan Torah is something which is a living reality, and it arrives every year, and it's aroused spiritually every year anew. This Chadesh every year. And the truth is, we thought about this 50 years, that the Etzem Maisa Mitzvah, and the Bir Halacha brings down 7, 8, 9 Rishonim that hold Bizman Hazeh, it's a mitzvah min HaTorah. So the essential act of the mitzvah, the act of counting, the Etzem Maisa Mitzvah, is the greatest proof the Chinuch is absolutely correct. Parenthetically, the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim agrees with the Chinuch. The point is, Halacha L'Maisa, the Shulchan Aruch says, one must know the date he is counting before the Sphira. Tov Peites. So the question is, he knows the day that he's holding. 5th day, 18th day makes no difference. So now he has to have that information available to him. These facts are knowledge that he's aware of, total awareness of this day. If he knows the information, why does he need a Sphira B'Peh? Why does he need an act of counting? Number two, to whom is he counting? He's not counting to somebody else, he's counting to himself. Everybody has to count. Everybody has a personal obligation to count for himself. So he's speaking to himself. People that speak to themselves always have a problem mentally. So the mitzvah is, you know the information in advance before the essential act of counting, and you don't count to anybody else, you count to yourself. But he already knows the day of the sphere before the actual counting. A strange mitzvah indeed. What's the answer? Answer is, like Maran the Chazon Ish already elaborated in another area of a topic of different types of expressions. For example, the Chazon Ish says we have a dibur, we have a type of expression which creates a halachic entity. For example, if somebody makes a nedel and he says, Kikar zeh korban alai, I say, this piece of bread should be like a carbon to me, like a sacrifice should be prohibited. So the Gemara tells us through those words, Maran the Chazon Ish, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Shema Yisrael, every Jew should hear Hashem Elokeinu, He's God, our God, that in the future He will be Hashem Echad, accepted in the entire world. So it's not enough that you say this as a narration, as a statement of fact. It has to be said with a heartfelt yearning that that great day of Achris Hayomim, when Melech Mashiach will come, and the whole world, like Rashi al Torah says, will realize by Yom Hahu Yeh Hashem Echad Shmo Echad. On that day, everyone will realize that God is one, and He is the proprietor and owner of the world. So Shema Yisrael also has to be said emotionally, emanating from the heartfelt pining and longing for that great day where the whole world will accept HaKadosh Baruch Hu as the Melech, as the King of the universe. So likewise, insofar as Sfirat Ha'omer is concerned, the whole meaning of Sfirat Ha'omer could only be if it's not said as a narration, it's not said as a statement of fact that we know those facts in advance, but it's said yearning, emotional. Today is another day that we come closer to Matan Torah, and that is like a Eved Yishav Tzeil, like a servant who longs for the day of true freedom, when he will be released from his pettiness, he'll be released from his selfishness, he'll accept the Torah, and he'll be a real free person. So we see that the chinuch is absolutely correct. And during the period of Achana for Matan Torah, so the way we prepare for Matan Torah, and that's why Midas Hadin is very prevalent in the world, is through Tikkun HaMitzvahs, Midas. The Midas Hadin is prevalent in this world, specifically at a time of preparation for Kabbalas HaTorah, like the Chidush Yarim has pointed out. In order to have Matan Torah, Hashras HaShchina, what was Klal Yisrael mandated to do, and they achieved it. achdus, unity, and love one for another. And without the Chidush Yarim, we would have a very difficult understanding the simple words of the Chumash. Because the Torah tells us, B'chodesh HaShlishi l'tzeis b'nei Yisrael, V'eretz Mitzrayim b'yoyim hazeh bo midbar Sinai, V'yisu v'yachanu b'midbar v'yichan shom Yisrael neged ha'or. And Chazal are amazed. It says on the third month, the Jewish people departed Mitzrayim, b'yoyim hazeh, on this day. On this day. This day means today. Jewish people arrived.
What? Yeah, it's don't say anything.
Oh, so there's no interest. But if something new, a freshly printed poster, so that arouses and attracts the attention of everybody. But this is all after Matan Torah. Here we're holding before Matan Torah. Unbelievable. So how can Chazal say b'chol yom v'yom yu kichadoshim beinecha, every day you have to arouse the feeling that it's brand new. It's new to me, Torah, today. It's new to me, mitzvahs today. But it's before Matan Torah. So what's b'chol yom v'yom? Yu chadoshim beinecha. We're dealing with the time sequence before Matan Torah. Nothing has occurred. So the Chidush Harim says an unbelievable yesod. Indeed, Rosh Chodesh Sivan was one of the greatest, most outstanding events ever to happen in Jewish history. It's Pascha Zu Hama. Spiritual erosion disappeared. How? So the pasuk tells us specifically, Vayichan Sham Yisrael neged ha'or, ki ish echad b'lei v'echad. Shar chanuyos, there was taroimes. Other encampments, Jewish people argued, quarreled, did not show the proper respect, did not show the proper love, dedication, and devotion to their fellow man. So Klal Yisrael reached the peak of Beinod Lechaver, Ki Ish Echad V'lei V'echad, total unity. That Hisayrus, that great inspiration for Klal Yisrael to come once upon a time in history to the darga of Ki Ish Echad V'lei V'echad, they reached that level And that was necessary because otherwise there would be no Matan Torah. It was indispensable to Kabbalas HaTorah. So that Osiris has to be constant and consistent every day. By Yom Hazeh, Mamish, today, tomorrow, every single day. But it's more, it has to be emphasized and stressed more during the Zman for Hachonah, for the acceptance of the Torah. So we today, who find ourselves also in between Pesach and Shavuos, so what is this indispensable link between these two holidays? It's for us to grow and develop in the 7 holy attributes of Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hoid, Yesoid, and Malchus. We don't have time to elaborate on this, but it's mentioned in the Siddur. Every day there's a tikkun of Chesed should be Chesed, kindness should be kindness, strength of kindness. It's basically to uplift us to great moral heights, great heights of ethicism, to make our soul ephemeral and spiritual, and that should have a tremendous effect on our physical bodies as well. And that's the sort of Eved Yishav Tzelem. That's what the Chidushei Harim answered. The Diburim of Sfiras Omer, the words of Sfiras Omer, have to be translated into Maisim, actions. There has to be a tikkun, amelioration, and improvement in our conduct. And through this implementation, we can reach the goal that on Matan Torah we can be, like the Zohar says, B'nei Heicholo de Malka, we enter into the halls of the king. We are in the king's palace, B'nei Heicholo de Malka. And every single day we have to feel, says the Chidushei Harim, that we rose one level higher. We exalted ourselves one level higher, that will be able to be granted admission into the Heicholos of holiness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Chidushei Harim added, it's also accepted that the Memtes Yemei Sevira are also corresponding, the 49 days, to the 48 elements and attributes for which the Torah is required. And of course, the question naturally arises, if Yisrael Salanter asked the question as well, here we have 49 days of Sfira, and the Torah can be acquired and must be acquired only with 48, so what's the 49th? So Rabbi Yisrael Salanter answered, the 49th day is a review of all the other 48 elements that the Torah is required. Now we already acquired the 48 attributes, and now we review them, and we, so to speak, try to re-energize ourselves with them. However, the Chidushei Harim answered a different answer. We can't forget the basics. The 49th day is Derech Eretz Kodma L'Torah. So far as we're concerned, the lesson we can derive is on the 49th day as well, to improve, ameliorate our conduct vis-a-vis others with our own understanding of Derech Eretz Kodma L'Torah. And how beautifully the Chidushei Harim added. Till Lag Boimer, Lag is 33, right? So till Lag Boimer, which is the 33rd day, we have 32 days. What is that corresponding to? What word? Leiv. Develop a heart. Leiv, numerically, is 32. So till Lag Boimer, the 33rd day of the Yomer. So for the first 32, we have to develop and grow a heart, feeling, emotions. And then how many are remaining from the 33rd to 49th. What word is it? Toiv. Toiv is Tes 9. Vov is 6. That's 15. And Beis is 2. So we have another 17. 17 and 32 equals 49. So the code to remember our avodah, our service that's required of us for accepting the Torah, for getting the Torah as a present, is to develop a leiv toiv.